and shelter. As hunter-gatherers, this was fundamentally true to who we were, as we did not have supermarkets and convenience stores at our fingertips like we do now. And as society began to develop, we did not have to walk as far always, but there's still an importance of walking in our culture, especially in religion. Scriptures, like the Bible, had figures like Jesus going on pilgrimages of hundreds of thousands of miles just to see spiritual clarity. But as society has continued to develop, especially recently, the need to pilgrimage has seemed to become less as the desire to sit has increased. And in the last 100 years, the sedentary lifestyle has entrapped nearly 80% of Americans, according to Forbes magazine. The advancement of technology has caused the purpose of the working class to be servicing a 14 by 10-inch computer screen. And though this may be enjoyable for some, for most, it's probably not the way our brains are designed to function. One research study done by Lizzie Thomas showed that our amygdalas, when exposed to just 90 minutes of walking in nature, which is our control center in our brain, reduced significantly, which meant that we were much less anxious and much less stressed. But a 90-minute walk in an urban setting had no reduction in amygdala activation, which meant that no matter how stressed you were, there was no escaping it in an urban setting. But in nature, it was very easy to get at least a reduction. And this is kind of the problems that we see in a modern industrialized society, where there's no really escape from the anxieties that come from it, except getting out in nature. And this is something that people do all the time. And whether it's hiking or getting outside or any sort of recreation, really, is an outlet for many people. And one that I think is very interesting is the activity of through hiking, which is starting at one side of a trail and going through to the other. Simple, right? Super easy. Not actually. These trails can be 1,200 miles long and can last months to do on end. But people love to do it. And today I'd like to talk about the development of through hiking in America and how modern society has potentially influenced its development. And one of the most famous trails that people through hike is the Appalachian Trail. It was proposed by a man named Bennett McKay. As a Harvard professor, he coined the term geotechnics. Geotechnics is essentially the philosophy that since nature is so essential to who we are as human beings, as society continues to develop, we need to have outlets for people to get outside and get moving. He proposed the Appalachian Trail in 1921, which was kind of just the beginning of the world that we see it now. This was 14 years after the development of the Model T car and 4 years after the end of the First World War. And so he was kind of seeing society change a little bit and things becoming faster and more quickly paced. In specific, he noticed that this increased pace was causing people's souls to kind of be crushed. He said that recreation, in the largest sense, is the recreation of the human spirit that is being crushed by the machinery of the modern industrial city. He saw what Lizzie Thomas proved in her research study, that cities and too much infrastructure kind of inhibit people from whatever's going on, whatever that is. And his answer to whatever that was the Appalachian Trail. And many of the benefits that come with it, like mountain towns being able to develop and jobs coming with that, but also to the human spirit, like we just discussed. And not long after he proposed it was it developed, and shortly after that, people began to hike it. The first of which was a man by the name Earl Schaefer. And in 124 days, he traversed the 1,200 miles of the Appalachian Trail with just one pair of tattered boots and survived off of cornbread alone. But though he was the first, he certainly was not the last. Just 2 years later, in 1950, a lady named Emma Gatewood did the trail. And she was the first woman to do it, but that's not the most impressive part. She was 67 years old. They would call her Grandma Gatewood, and the story of her traversing the Appalachian Trail was quickly picked up by the National Geographic, and pretty soon she was a celebrity, but so too was the Appalachian Trail. And this was the beginning of through hiking kind of entering the mainstream. But it took a while, and there were not a lot of trails around. And so in the next 20 years, from the 50s to the 70s around, many trails were getting built. And they built the PCT and the JMT and many different trails, which then by the 70s and into the 90s were ready to be hiked. And then by the 90s, they kind of took off and people were hiking all the time until now. And which is very interesting, I think, because in the 1970s, the amount of people that worked low activity or sedentary jobs was around 20%. And by the early 2000s, it had already jumped to 40%. And today, as we have comfortably strolled into the digital age, it's upwards of 80%, as I mentioned earlier. And so it seems that as people are becoming more and more sedentary, the desire to hike has increased exponentially. Now, people hiking, there's a yearly through hiking amount of 12,000 people just doing the Appalachian Trail alone, which is incredible. So many people wanting to get outside. It shows that just we have this need to move around and to explore nature, that even when we don't need to, when our lives are so sedentary and we have such a access to the internet where we don't really need to go outside, that people still do, and that it'll always be a part of who we are. Thank you.